Imagine, like, creating something so universally beloved that massive theme parks are built in its honor, right? Billions of dollars are generated.
Yeah.
And a whole generation basically adopts your story as their personality.
Oh, yeah. Like people getting tattoos of it, having themed weddings, all of that.
Exactly. But then today, millions of your biggest, most dedicated fans are actively plotting how to, well, sink your brand new television show, just to spite you.
It's wild. I mean, it's a complete inversion of the traditional Hollywood model. Usually a studio relies on a built-in fan base to act as, free marketing.
Right.
But here, that exact same fan base is weaponized against the product before it even airs.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. We are thrilled you're joining us today because we are tearing into a pop culture anomaly that just exploded. I'm talking late March of 2026.
The HBO Max trailer.
Yes, the brand new trailer for the highly anticipated television reboot of Harry Potter. And you, our listener, sent us some incredibly detailed materials to guide this journey.
Some really deep dive transcripts from prominent YouTube cultural commentators.
Yeah, specifically from channels like The Movie Cynic and Sydney Watson. These creators have been meticulously cataloging the absolute firestorm of internet reaction to this trailer.
And honestly, firestorm almost feels like an understatement at this point.
Right. It's crazy. And our goal today goes far beyond like a typical frame-by-frame trailer breakdown. We aren't here to critique the CGI on the Whomping Willow.
Or the lighting in the Great Hall, yeah. We are investigating a much larger, frankly bizarre phenomenon.
Exactly. We are answering the question of why this specific franchise, arguably the crown jewel of modern fiction, has morphed into a scorched earth battlefield.
A battlefield where, in a truly rare alignment, both the political left and the political right are passionately, actively rooting for the show to fail.
Which you never see. But just a quick heads up for you guys as we jump in. We're dealing with some incredibly heated, highly political commentary from both sides of the aisle today.
Very heated. And our job isn't to referee the culture war or, endorse a particular viewpoint.
Nope, not at all. We're just here to hold a magnifying glass to the battle, to break down the mechanics of the outrage and explain exactly why the internet is currently on fire.
Precisely. We're examining the underlying architect, looking at the how and the why, completely impartially, strictly following the arguments laid out in the commentary you provided.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the first major wrecking ball swinging at HBO, and that is the incredibly organized, highly vocal boycott campaign coming from the political left.
Yeah, you simply cannot talk about the modern era of this franchise without talking about its architect, J.K. Rowling.
Right. And looking at the materials from Sydney Watson and others, it's clear that for the political left, J.K. Rowling is viewed as public enemy numero uno.
That is the exact phrasing used in the commentary, numero uno. And it's a fascinating status.
How so?
Well, what the commentators point out is the unique nature of her fall from grace with this demographic. Like, she didn't write a poorly received sequel that destroyed her lore.
She didn't embezzle money or something like that?
Exactly. Her status as public enemy number one stems entirely from her public stance on gender identity. She stepped outside what the critics call the approved script.
And, man, the punishment for stepping off that script hasn't just been a few angry op-eds.
Not at all.
The commentary details a reaction that is just visceral. We're talking about years of sustained harassment, massive coordinated efforts to deplatform her, constant streams of death threats.
Yeah, the movie Cynic uses a brilliant phrase to describe this. He calls the reaction more exorcism than criticism.
Oh, wow. More exorcism than criticism. That perfectly captures the tone, doesn't it?
It really does. It is a concerted effort to ritually purge her influence from the culture entirely. And the commentators highlight how deeply this mentality has permeated mainstream media.
Right, because it isn't just anonymous people on Twitter doing this.
Exactly. You have major tech and culture publications stepping right into the fray. The Verge, for instance, published a piece explicitly stating that, quote, there is no ethical consumption of HBO's Harry Potter series.
Let's just pause on that phrase for a second. No ethical consumption, because that is heavy.
It's very heavy.
Like, that is academic language usually reserved for dissecting global supply chains, right?
Yeah.
Blood diamonds or horrific sweatshop labor.
Yeah, applying that exact moral weight to a fantasy television show about wizards is, well, it's wild. It shows the sheer gravity with which the left views Rowling's involvement.
So the argument The Verge is making is that simply clicking play on your remote is a direct material endorsement of bigotry.
That is the exact psychological framing. The commentary points to these viral tweets posts with literally millions of impressions making absolute binary moral ultimatums.
Like what are they saying?
Users claiming that if you watch the show, you are directly funding anti-trans organizations globally.
Wow.
Yeah. And another prominent post argued that if you pay for an HBO subscription to watch this, you are telling the world that wizard stories matter more to you than the lives of marginalized.
That is an intense guilt trip.
Some even use the term transgenocide, so it is framed not as a media preference, it's framed as a moral failing.
But wait, I want to bring up a massive contradiction that one of the commentators pointed out here, which completely blew my mind when I read it.
Oh, the Huffington Post thing.
Yes. Amidst all this intense rhetoric, there's a note about a journalist from the Huffington Post, which is undoubtedly a left-leaning publication.
Right, very progressive.
This journalist actually took the time to do a deep dive into J.K. Rowling extensive public statements on these issues. And I would assume based on the sheer volume of outrage, they found a mountain of explicit slurs and targeted hatred.
You'd think so.
But they came up completely empty-handed.
Yeah, that is the fascinating twist highlighted in the material. The Huffington Post journalist, after combing through all her essays, stated they couldn't find instances of explicit hatred or calls for violence. The counter-argument, which Rowling herself made, is that she is advocating for women's rights, specifically regarding sex-based protection and the sanctity of males.
However, the commentary makes it abundantly clear that the political left entirely rejects that framing.
Oh, 100%. To them, the distinction is meaningless.
Right. The advocacy for biological sex-based rights is viewed as inherently unavoidably transphobic. Therefore, any nuance is just flat. Her entire brand becomes fundamentally radioactive.
Which brings us to the core strategy of the boycott, right? Separating the art from the artist.
Because the demographic driving this boycott, they grew up with Hogwarts. They love the universe.
Exactly. What they are attempting is basically an amputation. They want to keep the magical world, but completely sever the creator.
But because J.K. Rowling is an executive producer on the HBO, and because she receives royalty, the franchise itself is viewed as a contaminated asset.
It's a guilt by royalty check situation.
Yeah, but I have to question the actual real-world logic of this strategy. Because if we look at the commentary, they bring up a perfect parallel from just a couple of years ago.
The video.
Right, the massive launch of the Hogwarts Legacy video game. If I remember correctly, the lead up to that game was a carbon copy of what we are seeing right now with the HBO trailer.
It was identical. The release of Hogwarts Legacy was treated by progressive online communities as the ultimate cultural litmus test.
The mandate was absolutely right. Do not buy it, do not stream it, do not discuss it positively.
Yeah, activists even created dedicated websites to track and harass Twitch streamers who dared to play the game live. The logic was that purchasing a digital copy of this game is a material contribution to real-world harm.
But here is the massive hole in that strategy. The game didn't just survive the boycott.
No, it completely obliterated it.
Exactly. Hogwarts Legacy shattered sales record. It dominated the gaming charts for the entire year, and it pulled in millions of concurrent players.
The boycott was incredibly loud on social media, but in the real world, it failed spectacularly.
And the YouTube commentators used this failure to highlight a massive disconnect in modern media.
Right. There is an ocean of difference between hyper-online, ideologically driven discourse and the behavior of the general consumer.
Exactly. If the Hogwarts Legacy boycott failed so spectacularly because regular people don't, cross-reference their entertainment purchases with a political checklist, why is the left trying the exact same tactic for the HBO show?
That's a good question.
Are they genuinely expecting millions of casual viewers to suddenly care about the executive producer's Twitter history? A dad working a 50-hour week who just wants to watch a cool magic show with his kids isn't running a moral audit on the studio.
He really isn't. And the commentators suggest that the actual goal of the boycott isn't necessarily immediate financial ruin for the studio, because deep down, they know the casual audience large.
So what is the goal then?
It operates as an internal purity. It's about moral signaling within their own. They must vocalize the boycott to maintain their ideological boundary, regardless of whether the show breaks viewership.
Oh, I see. It is a performance of boundary maintenance.
Exactly.
So the political left is essentially attacking the show from the outside, trying to burn the house down because they hate who holds the deed.
That's a good way to...
But the irony here is that the people already inside the house, the diehard purists and the political right, are actively trying to burn it down from the inside because of how it's being redecorated.
Yeah, while the left is attacking the creators' politics, the right is launching an all-out assault on the studio's politics.
Which brings us to the second massive front in this cult, the explosive backlash over the studio's casting decision, triggered by specific visual reveals in that late trailer.
Right. The commentators zero in on a very specific...
The trailer drops. We get our muted, moody glimpses of Harry, Ron, and Hagrid. And there are heavy rumors circulating, which Sydney Watson spends a lot of time dissecting, that Hermione will be played by a person of color.
But the true detonation of outrage happens in a split-second shot illuminating a dark stone hallway.
Yes, the official reveal of the new Severus Snape, played by the incredibly talented British actor Papa Essidou.
And Papa Essidou is a black man, which, for the political right and a massive segment of the purist fandom, was the ultimate validation of their...
The commentary details how this is viewed as the blatant, undeniable implementation of forced DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
They categorize this as deliberate race swapping. They argue the studio is taking an iconic, universally recognized character and fundamentally altering his identity purely to appease modern political sense.
Just to check corporate diversity box. And of course, the pushback to that outrage is instantaneous.
Oh, yeah. The left immediately points to the backlash and says, look, this proves you are racist.
Right. Like, if you are a grown adult throwing a tantrum on the internet because a black actor is playing a fictional wizard in a made-up school, your priorities are rooted in pure prejudice.
But the YouTube commentators we are analyzing argue that dismissing the right's anger as simple racism is intellectually late because it ignores the actual mechanics of their argument. The right defends its outrage by pointing directly to the concept of textual fidelity. They aren't arguing about race in a vacuum. They are arguing about strict adherence to the source material.
And they bring the actual text of the books to make their case, don't they?
They bring a mountain of... The movie Cynic highlights how incredibly specific J.K. Rowling was when describing Snape's physical appearance.
Right.
Over the course of 7 books, he is repeatedly explicitly described as pale, having a sallow complexion, and literally being the, quote, color of milk.
Wow, color of milk. That's very specific.
Yeah, this isn't just an omission of race, like a character where the author simply forgot to mention their skin color. It is a highly specific, reiterated description of a profound pallor.
Furthermore, the commentary emphasizes that Rowling was not shy about indicating when a character was a person of color.
She was very explicit. Kingsley Shacklebolt is described as black. Angelina Johnson described as black. Cho Chang, the Paddle Twins, Lee Jordan. When a character was not white, the text reflected.
Therefore, the argument from purists is that Rowling painted a very specific, undeniable visual portrait of Severus Snape, and HBO has made a conscious, deliberate choice to erase that portrait.
Exactly.
Look, I get the desire for fidelity. I really do. But let me throw out an analogy here to challenge this rigidity.
Okay, let's hear it.
We're talking about a universe that features infinite capacity magic bags, flying broomsticks, potions that literally rewrite your DNA to turn you into someone else.
Fire-breathing dragons, yeah.
Right. In a world entirely constructed on the mechanics of impossible magic, is a character's skin color really the load-bearing wall of the story? If Snape is black, does the fundamental machinery of Hogwarts just stop working?
It is a fair question, but the commentators argue that yes, in this highly specific instance, his appearance actually is a load-bearing wall.
Really? Why?
Not for magical reasons, but for thematic and narrative reasons. Snape's extreme whiteness, his sallow, greasy pallor, is intrinsically tied to his aesthetic and his psychological.
Okay.
He is written to be unsettling in a very specific Victorian Gothic way. He is the proverbial bat in the dungeon, hidden from the sun, festering in his own bitter. Changing that visual aesthetic changes the immediate psychological impression of the character.
Ah, so you're altering the subconscious language of the scene before the actor even speaks a single line of dialogue.
Exactly. But the commentators dive much deeper than that. They unpack the very real, very uncomfortable narrative implications of this casting when you place it in the context of modern American cultural dynamic.
Oh, this is the part that really got me. They pull specific story beats from the original text that suddenly take on a completely different, incredibly volatile weight when you put a black actor in the role.
The Neville Longbottom Boggart scene?
Yes. When I read this in the commentary, it completely reframed the issue for me. In the 3rd book, we have this pivotal scene in a classroom. We learn that Neville Longbottom, this young, incredibly timid, often incompetent student, has a greatest fear.
Right. And when he faces a boggart, a creature that shapeshifts into whatever terrifies you most, it doesn't turn into a monster or a demon.
It turns into Professor Snape. Because Snape ruthlessly, psychologically tortures this child on a daily basis.
Now, the commentators pose a critical question to the studio. What are the optics in the political climate of 2026 of a young, presumably white boy's absolute greatest paralyzing fear being an older black man in a position of authority who is constantly terrorized
and belittling him and threatening to physically poison his pet toad? The optics are a nightmare for a studio. It completely shifts from a quirky, dark fantasy trope about a mean teacher to something deeply uncomfortable and racially charged.
And the commentators don't stop there. They bring up an even more explicit, the bullying of young Snape by James Potter.
Oh, man. Snape's worst memory.
Exactly. There's this deeply famous, pivotal flashback scene. A teenage James Potter, who is wealthy, popular, and conventionally attractive, uses a spell to physically assault young Snape.
He strings Snape up in the air upside down, publicly exposing him, humiliating him, and physically dominating him while a crowd just watched.
Again, the commentary asks us to consider the visual reality of filming that scene. How does the visual of a black teenager being strung up against his will, mocked, and physically dominated by a wealthy white teenager land with a modern audience?
It lands terribly. The historical echoes of that imagery are impossible to ignore, and this is where the right's fear really crystallizes.
Because the commentators argue that HBO and modern Hollywood executives are acutely, almost paralyzingly aware of these racial opposites.
Therefore, the purists' fear isn't just about an aesthetic swap. It is the absolute certainty that because the studio changed the race, the writers will now have to rewrite the fundamental dynamics of the characters to avoid these racial landmines.
That is the core anxiety driving the backlash. It is never just a surface-level swap. Once you change the race of a character heavily involved in themes of bullying, subjugation, or terror, the studio will inevitably soften Snape's cruelty towards Neville.
They will have to alter or entirely cut James Potter's assault on Snape.
And suddenly the dominoes fall. The faithful adaptation begins to unravel, and the complex, deeply flawed character of Snape is sanitized. The change becomes a catalyst for narrative structural collapse.
So the argument is that Hollywood won't be able to resist making race a focal point of the narrative, either intentionally or defensively.
Right.
But to understand why the fan base is so inherently distrustful of the studio's intentions, we have to look backward, because this friction over Snape isn't an isolated incident. The commentary insists we examine the recent historical track record of Hollywood race swapping to see why audiences are so incredibly defensive.
The commentators provide a fascinating spectrum of recent casting change. They categorize them into distinct successes and catastrophic failures, which really helps isolate exactly what triggers audience.
Let's begin with a change that was overwhelmingly embraced. Jeffrey Wright's portrayal of Commissioner Gordon in the recent film, The Batman.
Yes, Jeffrey Wright is a brilliant black actor stepping into the role of a historically white, incredibly famous comic book character.
And the commentators note that when the casting was announced, there was the predictable baseline internet grumbling, right? The phrase race swap always sets off a small alarm.
Sure. But the moment the movie premiered, that controversy vanished into thin air. It was a complete non-issue.
So the analysis focuses on why it vanished. Why was Jeffrey Wright universally accepted while other casting changes face relentless boycott?
The answer lies in the preservation of the character's core ethos. Commissioner Gordon's identity within the Batman mythos has never been rooted.
What is it rooted in?
His defining characteristics are his exhaustion, his unshakable moral compass, and his unspoken instinctual alignment.
The movie's cynic made a great comparison. He likened their dynamic to the gritty detective partnership in the movie C7.
Oh,
As long as the actor playing Gordon looks like he hasn't slept in 72 hours, wears a rumpled trench coat, and projects that specific brand of world-weary authority, the fundamental core of the character is completely...
Exactly. The director didn't try to update Gordon's backstory to reflect modern racial dynamics. He just hired a powerhouse actor who perfectly captured the essence.
The performance was undeniably authentic, so the audience bought in completely.
But the commentators immediately juxtaposed that triumph with a glaring failure, a situation where the casting change felt entirely hollow and was viciously rejected by the fan.
They point to the recent animated film, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, and its reimagining of the character April O'Neil.
This contrast is incredibly sharp because much like Commissioner Gordon, April O'Neil's race is not a sacred, unchangeable pillar of her character. She isn't strictly defined by being Caucasian.
So changing her visual appearance shouldn't have been a catastrophic event.
It shouldn't have. But the commentary highlights that it was a massive issue because the creators didn't just change her skin color, they completely annihilated her established personality.
Historically, April O'Neil is depicted as a confident, capable television reporter, or at the very least, a plucky, courageous investigator who aids the Turtles, right? She is competent.
Very competent. But the commentators describe how this new iteration completely overhauled her. She was reimagined as a bumbling, deeply awkward, borderline incompetent high school teenager.
And the critique specifically highlights that her defining character trait in this new film, the thing she does repeatedly under pressure, is projectile vomiting.
Projectile vomiting, yeah.
You take a beloved, capable female character, you change her race to generate headlines about diversity, and then you turn her into a literal gross-out punchline.
It's baffling. And the commentators argue that this strips away any illusion of creative reinvention. It makes her feel like pseudo-April.
Like an entirely new, deeply annoying character who is just wearing April O'Neil's name like a stolen jacket.
Exact. And this leads to the central thesis the commentators present regarding modern cast. If defenders of these changes constantly argue that the race of the character doesn't matter, then why does the studio go out of its way to change it?
Especially while simultaneously stripping away every recognizable personality trait.
Right. It ceases to feel like organic storytelling and reveals itself as blatant corporate box check. The demographic change becomes the sole defining feature of the character.
And modern audiences, regardless of their politics, have an incredibly fine-tuned radar for inauthenticity. They can smell corporate box checking a mile away.
They really can.
And speaking of bizarre corporate pattern, Sidney Whiteson's commentary zeroes in on a wildly specific, almost unbelievable trend in Hollywood diversity casting. They call it the ginger side of Hollywood.
This is one of the most intriguing observations in the provided materials. The commentators argue that when Hollywood executives decide they need to diversify a cast by altering an established white character, there is a vastly disproportionate tendency to specifically target characters who originally had red hair.
When you look at the list they compile, it's actually staggering. You have Ariel in the live-action Little Mermaid.
Right.
You have Mary Jane Watson in the Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man film. And yes, they tried to sidestep the heat by legally naming Zendaya's character Michelle Jones, but she was explicitly fulfilling the MJ narrative role.
Definitely.
You have Jimmy Olsen in Supergirl, Iris West in The Flash, Batgirl. The list goes on and on. It's too consistent to be a coincidence.
It is. The commentators pose a cynical but compelling theory. Why are the redheads always the expendable placeholders?
Yeah, why them?
The implication is that studio executives evict characters as low fruit. It's almost as if Hollywood calculates that red hair is a marginalized aesthetic trait easily swapped out for an actual marginalized demographic.
Allowing the studio to check a diversity box and garner media praise without ever having to touch their core blonde or brunette protagonists.
Exactly. It is a highly calculated, risk-averse corporate formula.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it's very easy to dismiss all of this as a modern symptom of the 2020s culture.
We tend to think that getting aggressively angry about casting changes is a new phenomenon born on Twitter.
But the commentary takes us in a time machine. They pull a counterexample from the late 1990s to prove that this debate is actually decades old.
The 1997 live-action movie adaptation of the comic book Spawn.
Yes, this historical context is vital.
It really is. In the original Spawn comic book mythology created by Todd McFarlane, there is an integral character named Terry Fitzgerald.
Carrie is the protagonist's best friend. He's the moral center of the story, and he eventually marries the protagonist's widow. He is a crucial emotional anchor.
And in the comic books, Terry Fitzgerald is a black man.
But when New Line Cinema cast the 1997 movie, despite the film having a black lead and Michael J. White, they made a highly controversial decision regarding Terry Fitzgerald.
They cast a white actor, D.B. Sweeney, to play him.
And the commentators explain the exact studio logic behind, which is just insane. The executives were genuinely terrified. They looked at the demographics and decided that having both the lead hero and his best friend be black would make the movie too black for mainstream international commercial success.
It was a casting decision rooted entirely in demographic calculus and financial, showing absolutely zero respect.
And the commentators focus heavily on the fan reaction in 1997. Long before social media, long before the modern vocabulary of social justice, the fans absolutely despise this change.
They rebelled. Todd McFarlane had to spend months defending the studio's cowardly decision in the letters columns at the back of his comic book because the readers were so fiercely angry.
And the crucial takeaway here is why the fans were angry. In 1997, the fans weren't using terms like whitewashing or systemic erasure.
Right, the language wasn't there yet.
The criticism was raw, simple, and entirely about the story. The fans hated it because it was glaringly inauthentic. They looked at the screen and said, "That is not Terry Fitzgerald. You changed him for money." They were demanding fidelity.
This historical example is the linchpin of the commentators' argument. It proves that the core frustration hasn't evolved in 30 years.
Whether it is a black character cynically made white in 1997 to appease international market, or a white character cynically made black in 2026 to appease domestic media critics,
the audience's reaction is driven by the exact same. If the character works perfectly as written, why are you changing them? It is a fundamental demand for creative authenticity over corporate meddling.
It's not inherently about the specific color of the actor's skin. It's about the feeling of authenticity. It's the audience needing to feel like the people making the show actually respect the world they are adapting.
But according to the analysis we are reviewing, casting is only one superficial layer of the problem.
Wait, there's more.
Oh yeah. If we magically resolve the Snape controversy tomorrow, the commentators argue this HBO reboot is still steering directly into an iceberg.
And it has to do with a total catastrophic misunderstanding of the actual feel of Harry Potter, doesn't it?
This transitions us into an analysis of the visual language and the overarching tone presented in the trailer. The commentators dissect the footage and arrive at a stark...
Let me guess, too dark.
The show looks incredibly muted, flat, and devoid of life. It appears to be desperately trying to adopt the visual aesthetic of prestige TV, mirroring the grim, heavily desaturated, shadowy look of shows like Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon.
HBO is dealing with a multi-billion-dollar intellectual property. It seems like their executives think that prestige TV automatically equals serious, critically acclaimed art.
Right. They are applying an adult, grim, dark visual filter to a story that fundamentally begins as a children's book because they are terrified of the show looking cheap, silly, or childish.
But the commentators argue that this choice completely destroys the franchise's tonal evolution.
The emotional power of the Harry Potter narrative relies on a very specific trajectory. Think back to the first book, or Chris Columbus's first film, The Sorcerer's Stone.
It is vibrant. It is bathed in warm golds and rich reds. It is whimsical.
Exactly. The story is told through the eyes of an abused 11-year-old boy who is stepping into a magical world for the very first time. There is a profound, necessary sense of childlike wonder.
And it has to start that way.
Yeah.
Because the genius of the series is that it slowly, meticulously grows darker, colder, and more dangerous alongside the audience.
Yeah, by the time you get to the later books, people are dying, the government is collapsing, and the colors have naturally drained from the world.
But if you start the new series in year one with a dreary, desaturated, depressive look, you have burned through your entire tonal runway before the story even begins.
If Hogwarts already looks like a gloomy prison in season 1, where do you escalate to visual when the Dark Lord actually returns?
You have painted yourself into a visual corner. And this highlights a fascinating paradox that the commentators, particularly the movie cynic, spend a lot of time analyzing.
This HBO production is simultaneously trying to be incredibly faithful to appease the angry fans, while also completely missing.
The trailer features shots that are virtually indistinguishable from the original 2001 movie, don't they?
It's bizarre. They specifically point out a promotional still of the actor Nick Frost, who has been cast to play the lovable half-giant Hagrid.
And the commentary notes that Nick Frost isn't just wearing a similar outfit. He is wearing the exact same costume design that Robbie Coltrane wore 25 years ago.
It's an identical replica of the coat, the hair, the beard. It's not a creative reimagined costume.
Which prompted a rather brutal public comment from Chris Columbus himself, the director who originally established that iconic visual identity.
Yeah, when asked about this reboot, Columbus bluntly questioned the artistic merit of the project. He asked, essentially, what the point is if the studio is just going to repeat everything dialogue for dialogue, beat for beat, and costume for costume.
The commentators theorize that this robotic exactness is a panicked defensive strategy by HBO.
The studio knows they are angering the purists with modern casting updates and a grim visual tone, so they are trying to offer a peace offering by saying, look, we kept the exact same coat. We're being faithful.
But the result is a product that feels terrifyingly lifeless. It captures the logistical data of Harry Potter, the correct wand shapes, the correct dialogue, but it entirely misses the soul and the magic.
It feels like an AI-generated checklist of recognizable iconography rather than a genuine creative endeavor. The commentators describe it as having the distinct, hollow feel of highly funded, very bad fan fiction.
It feels like HBO is desperately trying to serve two completely different masters. And as a result, they are burning the meal for both of them.
You have a show making modern casting changes that deeply alienate the hardcore traditionalists.
But it is simultaneously relying on an exact copy-paste visual nostalgia that the progressive critics despise because it reminds them of the author.
And this leads into a massive generational disconnect that Sydney Watson highlights. The ultimate question becomes, who is this show actually for?
That is the critical, potentially fatal vulnerability of this entire project. The commentary breaks down the demographics here.
Millennials are the generation that grew up alongside these books. They attended the midnight release parties.
They have an incredibly deep, almost immovable emotional attachment to the original cinematic aesthetic. To a millennial, Alan Rickman doesn't just play Snape. Alan Rickman is Snape.
You cannot simply overwrite a 20-year emotional bond with a new actor and a darker color palette.
But HBO isn't stupid. They know millennials are attached. They are making this show to capture a brand new generation, right? The Gen Alpha kids and the younger Gen Z audience.
But as the commentary points out, that younger demographic doesn't possess the built-in fanatical reverence for the franchise.
If they see a dreary, desaturated wizard show pop up on their iPad, they might watch a few episodes, sure, but they aren't emotionally invested enough to defend the show online, buy the merchandise or champion it through controversy.
Therefore, the show lacks a solid, dedicated core demographic. The original fans are alienated by the perceived disrespect and the modern alterations, and the new generation has absolutely no nostalgic loyalty to compel them to care deep.
Which means the studio is walking onto the biggest battlefield in pop culture history, with absolutely no allies to defend.
Because the show has thoroughly alienated both the purist right and the progressive left, the commentators argue that HBO has vastly underestimated the power of modern audiences to actively, intentionally sink a massive television production.
And this brings us to a monumental shift in the entertainment landscape that we are witnessing right now.
We are analyzing the rise and the supreme influence of what can be termed anti-fan and the unprecedented power of independent online.
According to the analysis in the materials, the middle ground for this specific Harry Potter show has completely vanished. The casual viewer is being drowned out.
You have the left screaming hard pass because watching it supports J.K. Rowling, and you have the right screaming hard pass because of DEI casting and a lack of source fidelity.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We're looking at a fascinating tectonic shift in industry power.
It used to be that if a massive studio like HBO had a $100 million marketing budget, they could essentially force a hit into existence through sheer omnipresence.
Right. You couldn't escape the bus stop ads, the billboards, the talk show appearances.
But now, a guy sitting in a gaming chair with a microphone can genuinely counteract an HBO marketing.
The commentators emphasize the immense, tangible power of YouTube Critic. They specifically name-drop massive channels like Critical Drinker and Nerdrotic.
These creators haven't just built audiences, they have built highly engaged, deeply trusting communities.
And how do they operate? They basically provide the cliff notes for the culture war. They watch the media so their audience doesn't have to.
The commentators argue that we have reached a tipping point where audiences trust an independent, often cynical voice with a webcam far more than they trust a slick, focus-grouped corporate marketing.
People turn to Nerdrotic or Critical Drinker to find out if a show is going to insult their intelligence or disrespect their favorite lore before they even consider subscribing to the streaming service.
And the sources provide a stunning piece of empirical evidence to validate this power shift.
Oh, the Leslie Headland quote.
Yes, they cite a recent, highly publicized interview with Leslie Headland, the showrunner for The Acolyte, the massive Star Wars series on Disney Plus era.
In the interview, she explicitly admitted that the coordinated wave of negative commentary from YouTube channels and independent fan creators actively tanked her show's viewership and chances of success.
Let that sink in. A showrunner for Star Wars, backed by the infinite money glitch that is the Walt Disney Company, publicly admitted that bad buzz generated by YouTubers killed her show.
In the modern streaming era, bad buzz is fatal. The algorithmic momentum of negativity is incredibly hard to break.
The commentators predict that if an army of these highly influential content creators spends the next entire year, the long lead up to the show's premiere, meticulously cataloging every leaked photo, every awkward casting interview, and every modern update in the Harry Potter.
The show is effectively doomed before episode 1 even airs. The narrative of failure will be cemented as undeniable fact in the public consciousness.
The well will be completely poisoned. And this brings us back, beautiful, to the contrast with the Hogwarts Legacy.
The commentators reiterate that the game succeeded precisely because it navigated this exact minefield with surgical precision.
It worked because it offered a genuinely new. It was set 100 years in the past. It didn't try to overwrite beloved, deeply established character Harry.
And crucially, the developers did not antagonize their core fan base before the launch.
They didn't do press tours lecturing the audience about modernizing the franchise. They didn't engage in the culture war.
They simply put their heads down and delivered a highly polished, immersive experience in a familiar, beloved world. They respected the lore.
The HBO show, according to the commentary we spent the last hour dissecting, is doing the exact opposite.
It is sprinting through a minefield and stepping on every single explosive simultaneously.
It is overwriting iconic characters. It is fundamentally altering the visual tone. It is dragging itself into the center of the...
And it is doing all of this with an intellectual property that is already viewed as highly radioactive by half the population.
Which leads us to the ultimate conclusion our commentators reach regarding the lifespan of mega franchise. It forces us to confront some profound, almost philosophical questions about the nature of storytelling and cultural ownership.
Exactly. Let's briefly recap the incredible, chaotic journey we've taken today through these materials.
We started by examining a multi-billion-dollar franchise caught in an inescapable, crushing vice grip.
On one side, the Reboot is facing a relentless, highly organized boycott from the political left, who view any financial success of this show as a direct moral endorsement of J.K. Rowling's controversial politics. To them, the franchise is a contaminated asset.
And on the opposing side, the production is facing a fierce, highly mobilized backlash from the political right and from purist fans.
They are outraged over perceived forced diversity cast, specifically the casting of Papa Saidu as Severus Snape, which they argue fundamentally shatters the visual storytelling, the thematic aesthetic, and the delicate narrative dynamics established in the source material.
And caught squarely in the middle of this intense crossfire is a television show that visually appears to be a soulless, desaturated corporate cash grab.
A show desperately trying to mimic the grim tone of adult prestige TV while clumsily copying the exact costume designs of a 25-year-old movie, resulting in a product that the commentators dismiss as incredibly expensive, very bad fan fiction.
The studio executives have managed to alienate the progressive activists, they have infuriated the traditionalist loyalists, and they're entirely reliant on a younger generation that simply does not possess the nostalgic devotion required to keep a controversial franchise afloat in this era.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought to end on today. It's a concept heavily implied by the commentary we've explored, and it's something I want you to mull over.
At a certain point of massive, global, generation-defining cultural who truly owns?
Legally, the answer is incredibly simple. J.K. Rowling wrote the word, she holds the copyrights, and she owns the intellectual property. HBO paid an exorbitant amount of money for the broadcast right. They own the legal paper.
But culturally, the commentators make a compelling argument that the story actually to the fan.
A story does not become a universal phenomenon just because a publishing house prints millions of copies. It becomes a phenomenon because millions of individuals internalize it, invest in it, and weave it into the fabric of their own childhoods.
And if a creator or a massive corporate television pushes a beloved lore too far away from what those fans originally fell in love with, whether that is through radioactive political controversy, fundamental alter characters, or just stripping away the whimsical magic to make it look edgy, the fans realize they hold power.
They will simply revoke their consent. They will close their wallets, they will cancel their subscriptions, and they will walk away, taking the magic with them. Where is the line between an author's legal right to tinker with their creation and the cultural ownership of an entire generation that grew up inside that?
It seems we are watching a massive cultural monument realize, in real time, that its foundation isn't actually made of or legal contract. It is made entirely of the audience's goodwill.
And when that goodwill evaporates, the structural collapse isn't just possible, it is inevitable. We started this deep dive talking about a building undergoing a controlled demolition, but looking at the evidence, maybe it's not controlled at all.
Maybe we are just watching the architects swing the wrecking ball themselves, completely unaware that they are standing on.
I want to thank you so much for coming along in this deep dive into these fascinating cultural critiques today. Keep questioning the media you consume, keep looking for the why behind the outrage, and we will see you next time.